July 1st, 1863. The small Pennsylvania town of Gettysburg awoke to the distant rumble of artillery. But on Cemetery Ridge, something impossible was happening. The air itself seemed to tear apart, crackling with energy that had no place in the 19th century. Through the shimmering portal stepped 120 soldiers of Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. They wore digital camouflage, carried M4 carbines, and had enough firepower to level a city block. Their mission brief had mentioned a training exercise. Reality had other plans. Captain Marcus Chen was the first to realize something had gone catastrophically wrong. The GPS showed nothing. Radio frequencies were dead. And marching toward them across golden wheat fields were thousands of men in blue wool uniforms, carrying single-shot muskets, moving in formations that belonged in a museum. His combat veteran instincts kicked in immediately. He ordered his men to defensive positions along the stone wall running across the ridge, establishing overlapping fields of fire. Whatever was happening, they were soldiers first. They would adapt. The Confederate Army had been advancing on Gettysburg since dawn, pushing back Union cavalry scouts. When General Lee's forward observers reported enemy positions on Cemetery Ridge, they noted unusual uniforms and strange formations. The reports were dismissed as confusion in the fog of war. By 1000 hours, elements of General Heath's division were advancing directly toward Bravo Company's position. They had no idea they were walking into a meeting between centuries. The 1st Confederate Regiment came within 800 meters. Captain Chen watched through his optics, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. Time travel was fiction. This was real. Those were real soldiers following real orders, about to die in a real battle that his history books said claimed 51,000 casualties. He made a decision that would change everything. He activated his loudspeaker and broadcast a warning in clear English, telling the advancing forces to halt, that they faced weapons beyond their comprehension. The Confederate column hesitated, confused by the voice booming across the fields. Their officers, thinking it some kind of Yankee trick, ordered them forward. Chen gave one more warning. Then he authorized a demonstration. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, his best marksman, fired a single 3-round burst from his M240 machine gun. The rounds tore through a wooden fence post at 600 meters, splintering it into fragments. The sound alone stopped the Confederate advance cold. Nothing in their experience prepared them for the rapid-fire crack of modern automatic weapons. Officers shouted orders, trying to maintain formation, but confusion rippled through the ranks. Some men dropped to the ground. Others started backing away. The entire regimental front dissolved into chaos without a single casualty. But war has momentum that cannot be easily stopped. Confederate artillery batteries unlimbered on Seminary Ridge, and within minutes, smoothbore Napoleon cannons opened fire. Solid shot and shell whistled overhead, most falling short, some smashing into the stone walls. Bravo Company went to ground, their Kevlar helmets and body armor proof against 19th-century ordnance fragments. Chen knew he faced an impossible choice. His company could slaughter thousands with impunity, or they could try to stop a battle that history said had to happen. He chose a third option. They would defend themselves, but they would fight to disable, not to destroy. When the next Confederate brigade advanced, Bravo Company opened fire, but they aimed low, at legs and equipment. Modern rifles with holographic sights made precision shooting routine. Confederate soldiers fell, wounded but alive, their legs swept from under them by 5.56mm rounds. Others dove for cover as bullets cracked past their heads. The psychological impact was devastating. Veteran soldiers who had stood firm at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville broke and ran when faced with invisible death arriving faster than sound. Within minutes, the entire brigade was in full retreat, leaving hundreds of wounded but relatively few dead. The sound of sustained automatic fire brought Union commanders racing to Cemetery Ridge. General Winfield Scott Hancock arrived on horseback, his uniform already dusty from a morning of positioning troops. He found soldiers in strange uniforms manning positions with weapons that seemed to fire continuously without pause for reloading. Captain Chen met him personally at the stone wall, and in a brief, surreal conversation that both men knew sounded like madness, explained that they were American soldiers from the future, that they knew how this battle would unfold across 3 terrible days, and that they could help minimize casualties on both sides while ensuring Union victory. Chen offered proof, details of Confederate positions and planned movements that no spy could know. Hancock, a pragmatic combat leader who had seen enough impossible things in the past hour to suspend disbelief, looked at the shattered Confederate formations retreating across the fields, at weapons that fired faster than thought, at soldiers whose discipline and bearing marked them as professionals beyond doubt. He made a command decision that defied all military protocol and common sense. He would integrate these impossible allies into his defensive line and deal with explanations later. Night fell over Gettysburg with the battlefield in eerie quiet. Usually, such lulls were filled with the screams of wounded men lying between the lines, but Bravo Company's medics, equipped with modern trauma gear, had moved forward under cover of darkness. They treated Confederate wounded alongside Union casualties, their advanced medical knowledge saving lives that history said were lost. Word spread quickly. The strange soldiers in gray-green uniforms were warriors but also healers. Confederate pickets, expecting Yankee treachery, instead found their comrades bandaged and stabilized, left with canteens of clean water. General Lee held a council of war in his headquarters. His subordinates were shaken. They reported facing weapons that fired without reloading, that struck with impossible accuracy at ranges beyond musket shot. Longstreet, always the skeptic, argued for withdrawal. They faced an enemy they could not comprehend, let alone defeat. But Lee's blood was up. He had invaded the North to win a decisive victory, to break Union morale and force peace negotiations. He would not be turned back by tricks and strange weapons. He ordered a massive assault for the second day, concentrating forces against the Union left flank at Little Round Top. July's 2nd dawned hot and humid. Captain Chen studied the tactical map his intelligence sergeant had reconstructed from memory and terrain analysis. He knew what was coming. Hood's division would assault Little Round Top in the late afternoon, nearly overrunning the position before desperate Union reinforcements held the line. History recorded it as one of the most crucial small-unit actions of the war. If the Confederates took that hill, they could enfilade the entire Union line, potentially winning the battle and perhaps the war. Chen deployed 2 platoons to reinforce the 20th Maine's position, commanded by Colonel Joshua Chamberlain. When the Confederate assault came, it came with overwhelming force and ferocious determination. Thousands of screaming rebels charged up the rocky slope through thick timber, their distinctive yell echoing off the hillside. The 20th Maine soldiers fired and reloaded as fast as their black powder muskets allowed, ramrods flying, fingers burning on hot barrels. But the gray tide kept coming, kept climbing, kept dying, but never stopping. Then Bravo Company's platoons opened up with measured, devastating fire. The M240 machine guns created interlocking fields of fire that no 19th-century force could penetrate. Tracer rounds lit up the darkening woods like deadly fireflies, red streaks cutting through the smoke. Confederates fell by the dozens, not dead but wounded, torn ligaments and shattered bones taking them out of the fight permanently but leaving them alive. The assault stalled as men sought cover behind rocks and trees, then broke as officers fell and units lost cohesion. But this was only the first wave. But Lee was not finished. He committed his reserves, sending fresh brigades into the maelstrom. The second wave advanced more cautiously, using cover, trying to flank the position. Modern soldiers against Civil War tactics should have been no contest, but sheer numbers and raw courage nearly overwhelmed the defenders. Bravo Company soldiers found themselves in close-quarters combat, using rifle butts and combat knives when rebels broke through the firing line. Sergeant First Class Williams went hand-to-hand with a Confederate color-bearer, both men fighting with desperate intensity until Williams disarmed him with a judo throw that would not be invented for another 40 years. The battle for Little Round Top raged for 3 hours. When it finally ended, the hill remained in Union hands, but at tremendous cost. Bravo Company had expended nearly 40% of their ammunition. Several soldiers were wounded by musket balls and bayonets. The 20th Maine had fought with incredible bravery, and Colonel Chamberlain personally thanked Chen's men he knew were not quite from his world, but who had stood shoulder to shoulder with his own. In the gathering dusk, both sides tended their wounded and prepared for what everyone knew would come next. Lee had one card left to play. July 3rd brought oppressive heat and an ominous silence. Lee's plan was simple and terrible. 15,000 men would advance across open ground against the Union center. Pickett's charge, history would call it, the high watermark of the Confederacy. Chen knew it would be a slaughter. He went to General Meade and proposed an alternative. Let Bravo Company advance under flag of truce and demonstrate their weapons to Lee personally. Show him that continued fighting was futile. Meade, desperate to avoid another day of carnage, agreed. Chen selected the squad and walked across the battlefield toward Confederate lines. Lee received them in his headquarters tent. The commanding general of the Army of Northern Virginia studied these strange soldiers with keen intelligence. Chen spoke plainly. He told Lee that his planned assault would fail, that thousands of brave men would die for nothing, that the Confederacy would ultimately lose this war. He offered proof, technical specifications, historical knowledge that no Union spy could possess. Lee listened in silence, his face unreadable. When Chen finished, Lee stood and walked to his map table. For long minutes, he studied the dispositions, the terrain, the impossible equation before him. Then Lee made his decision. He would attack. Not because he disbelieved Chen's words, but because he was a soldier, and soldiers follow their duty to the end. He thanked Chen for his honor in coming forward, then politely dismissed him. As Chen walked back across the fields, he understood. History had momentum. Some events were too large to be stopped by a single company of soldiers, no matter how advanced their weapons. He radioed his dispersed platoons and gave them their final orders. When Pickett's division stepped off, Bravo Company would do everything possible to minimize casualties while still maintaining the historical outcome. At 1 o'clock, Confederate artillery opened with the largest bombardment of the entire war. 150 guns hammered the Union center for nearly 2 hours, the earth shaking with each salvo. Bravo Company soldiers sheltered behind stone walls and earthworks, their modern equipment useless against the sheer weight and volume of fire. When the barrage finally lifted, leaving ears ringing and the air thick with sulfur smoke, an eerie quiet fell over the field. Then, from Seminary Ridge, they came. 15,000 soldiers in perfect formation, battle flags flying red and bright against the summer sky, officers on horseback maintaining alignment, advancing at quick march across 3/4 of a mile of open ground toward the Union center. It was magnificent and heartbreaking in equal measure. Chen felt tears on his face as he watched America tearing itself apart, brother against brother, state against state, ideal against ideal. This was the moment that would define a nation, and he was powerless to stop it. He could only try to preserve what lives he could in the maelstrom. Union artillery opened first, solid shot tearing bloody lanes through the advancing ranks. Still they came on, closing gaps, maintaining formation with parade ground precision. At 400 yards, Union infantry opened fire, volleys of musketry dropping rebels by the hundreds. And still they came on. Chen gave his orders. Bravo Company fired high into the flanks, suppressing Union artillery that was decimating the Confederate ranks, forcing Union infantry to duck, creating narrow corridors through which rebels could advance. They were not helping the Confederacy win. They were helping brave men reach their objective before dying. A few hundred Confederates reached the stone wall, the angle where the Union line bent. For a few brief moments, they planted their battle flags on Union soil. General Armistead, mortally wounded, fell among Union guns. The high water mark. Then it was over. The survivors were falling back, walking at first, maintaining dignity, then running as Union forces counterattacked. The field was carpeted with bodies, dead and dying men crying for water, for their mothers, for God. Chen ordered his company forward. They would spend the rest of the day as medics, not soldiers. Bravo Company worked through the night and into the next day. Their advanced medical training, their antibiotics and trauma dressings, their knowledge of triage and shock treatment saved hundreds of lives on both sides. Confederate surgeons watched in amazement as these strange soldiers performed procedures that seemed like magic, cleaning wounds with clear liquids, stopping bleeding with pressure bandages, preventing infection with pills. Union doctors learned techniques in those hours that would not be standard practice for decades. The wounded did not care about the paradox. They only knew that the soldiers in different uniforms gave them a chance to see home again. On July 5th, the portal opened again. The same crackling energy that had brought Bravo Company to Gettysburg now offered them a way home. Captain Chen made one final round of the field hospitals, shaking hands with soldiers from both armies, making sure his medics had distributed all remaining medical supplies. He met with Generals Meade and Hancock, with Confederate officers under flag of truce. He gave them one gift: knowledge that the war would end in Union victory in April of 1865, that the nation would survive and prosper. He urged them to seek peace when possible, to minimize suffering. As Bravo Company stepped back through the portal, they left behind a changed Gettysburg. The battle still happened, the Union still won, but casualty figures were lower than history recorded. Thousands of men saved by modern medicine and suppressive fire tactics. They left behind stories that would become legends, tales of soldiers from another time who fought with honor but also with mercy. More importantly, they left behind a seed of doubt in the minds of commanders on both sides. If the future held such terrible weapons, perhaps this war of brother against brother needed to end sooner rather than later. Back in their own time, Bravo Company faced debriefing, disbelief, and eventually acceptance. They had fought at Gettysburg. They had witnessed the pivot point of American history. They had seen men die for causes they believed in with everything they had. The experience changed them all. Captain Chen kept a Confederate mini-ball recovered from his body armor, a reminder that some things transcend time. Courage, honor, the terrible cost of war, and the hope that even in the darkest moments, humanity can choose mercy. The what-if of modern soldiers at Gettysburg is not about superior firepower or tactical dominance. It is about the unchanging nature of warfare's horror and the eternal question of how we wage it. Technology advances, weapons become more lethal, but the soldiers who carry them remain human, bound by conscience and compassion. Bravo Company's 3 days at Gettysburg proved that even with the power to reshape history, the greatest weapon is the choice to preserve life when possible. That lesson echoes across time, as relevant now as it was on those July days in 1863, when America fought itself and a company from the future tried to heal the wounds of the past.